Welcome back. Issuing a bank guarantee or SBLC is the straightforward part. The real test comes when something goes wrong, when a demand lands on the desk, when the applicant disputes it, when the beneficiary uses the guarantee as leverage rather than as a genuine claim. This lecture covers the mechanics that matter when guarantees are under stress. What constitutes a valid demand? Under URDG 758, a complying demand has three components: a written demand for payment, a supporting statement indicating in what respect the applicant is in breach of the underlying obligation, and any other documents specifically required by the guarantee itself. The critical point is this: the bank examines the demand document on its face. It does not investigate whether the applicant has actually breached the underlying contract. It does not contact the project owner, review the construction schedule, or assess whether the goods were delivered on time. Just as a bank examining LC documents looks at paper rather than cargo, a bank examining a guarantee demand looks at the demand document rather than the commercial reality behind it. If the demand complies on its face, the bank is obligated to pay. That is the independence principle in action. What happens when a demand arrives? The moment a demand is received, a clock starts. The bank has 5 business days to examine it and decide whether to honor or refuse. Step 1. Log and timestamp the demand immediately. The 5-day window begins on the day of receipt. Step 2. Examine the demand against the guarantee terms. Is everything present? Is the statement of default included? Are any required supporting documents attached? Step 3. Notify the applicant without delay. The applicant has a right to know a demand has been made, and in many cases, they will have information relevant to how the bank should respond. Step 4. If the demand complies, the bank pays and immediately seeks reimbursement from the applicant or, in a counter-guarantee structure, from the counter-guarantor. Step 5. If the demand does not comply, the bank notifies the presenter within the 5-day window, stating clearly the reason for non-compliance. A failure to notify within 5 days means the bank loses its right to refuse. When the applicant receives notice that a demand has been made, the most common reaction is to dispute it. The position is typically, the beneficiary has no right to call, we performed our obligations. This may well be true, but it does not change the bank's position. The guarantee is independent. The bank cannot refuse to pay simply because the applicant believes the demand is unfair, premature, or commercially unjustified. The bank's obligation is determined by the guarantee document, not by the underlying commercial dispute. The applicant's only legal recourse is to seek a court injunction preventing the bank from paying. But the threshold for obtaining such an injunction is extremely high. Courts in most jurisdictions are deeply reluctant to interfere with banking obligations. Doing so would undermine the entire value of the guarantee as an instrument. Injunctions are granted in very narrow circumstances, and obtaining one in the days between a demand and payment is practically difficult. The practical implication is straightforward. When you are advising an applicant at the structuring stage, make this clear. Once a guarantee is issued, the beneficiary has significant power. The applicant's real protection is in the underlying contract, in clearly defined performance standards, dispute resolution mechanisms, and conditions that must be met before a call can be made. After the guarantee is issued, those protections are much harder to enforce. One of the most common and commercially sensitive moments in a guarantee's life is the extend or pay demand. Rather than drawing on the guarantee outright, the beneficiary issues a demand that says, in effect, either extend the validity of this guarantee, or we will draw on it now. This is a leverage tool. The beneficiary may not genuinely intend to draw. They may simply be using the guarantee as pressure to force a renegotiation of the underlying contract, an extension of the project timeline, or some other commercial concession. Under URDG 758, Article 23, the guarantor may suspend payment for up to 30 calendar days while seeking instructions from the applicant or counter-guarantor on whether to extend. If the applicant consents to the extension, the guarantee is amended and the demand is withdrawn. If the applicant refuses, the bank pays and seeks reimbursement. In practice, most extend or pay situations are resolved commercially. The beneficiary gets their extension, the applicant gets more time, and the guarantee continues. But the pressure it creates is real, and clients who have not experienced it before are often caught off guard. Explaining this dynamic up front, that the beneficiary holds significant leverage through the extend or pay mechanism, is part of good client advisory. How a guarantee expires is one of the most practically important structuring decisions, and one that does not always get the attention it deserves. The ideal structure is a fixed expiry date. The guarantee expires on a specific named calendar date. Any demand must be received on or before that date, after which the guarantee becomes null and void. Example clause. This guarantee shall expire on 31st December 2026. Any demand for payment hereunder must be received by us on or before such date, after which this guarantee shall become null and void. Fixed expiry is clean, certain, and manageable. The bank knows exactly when its contingent liability ends. The second structure is the evergreen or automatic renewal clause. The guarantee is valid for an initial period, say 1 year, and automatically renews for successive 1-year periods unless the bank gives notice of non-renewal within a specified window before each anniversary. Example clause. This guarantee shall be valid from January 1st, 2026, and shall automatically renew for successive periods of 1 year unless we notify the beneficiary in writing of our intention not to renew at least 60 days prior to the then current expiry date. Evergreen guarantees are common in long-term infrastructure and project finance transactions. The risk for the bank is that they require active monitoring. If the notice window is missed, the guarantee rolls over automatically, and if the applicant's credit deteriorates over time, the bank may find itself unable to exit the guarantee without the beneficiary's agreement. The third structure is the open-ended or event-triggered expiry, and it is the most problematic. Here, the guarantee expires not on a fixed date, but upon the occurrence of a condition. Until all obligations of the applicant under the underlying contract have been fully discharged, or upon issuance of the final completion certificate by the project engineer. The problem is that these conditions are non-documentary. The bank has no way to verify whether the obligations have been discharged or whether a completion certificate has been issued. The contingent liability cannot be cleanly released. Disputes at expiry are common, and limit management becomes a headache. Banks should resist open-ended expiry clauses at the structuring stage and push for fixed dates. Where event-based expiry is genuinely unavoidable, the trigger must be documentary and verifiable, a certificate issued by a named party in a defined form, not a subjective assessment of contractual performance. A step-down or reduction mechanism can complement any of these expiry structures. Rather than remaining at the full amount throughout its life, the guarantee reduces proportionally as milestones are achieved and certified. This progressively reduces the bank's contingent exposure. The key drafting requirement is the same as for event-based expiry. The reduction trigger must be documentary. A milestone certificate signed by a named engineer, not a verbal confirmation or informal notification. The on behalf of structure. One more structure worth understanding, particularly for clients who are part of larger corporate groups. Some banks allow a credit facility to be held by one entity, the obliger, typically a parent company or group treasury vehicle, while the bank guarantee is issued on behalf of a different entity, a subsidiary or affiliate, that is the actual principal named in the guarantee. The benefits for the client group are significant. Issuance is centralized. One designated entity manages all BG capacity across the group with a single credit relationship and a single approved limit. Pricing is based on the obliger's credit profile, which in most cases is stronger than the individual subsidiaries, so guarantee fees are lower. Subsidiaries can obtain guarantees without needing their own credit facilities at the bank. And operationally, a pre-approved structure means faster issuance for individual transactions. From the bank's perspective, the credit risk sits with the obligor, the one with the approved facility, not necessarily with the entity named as principal in the guarantee. Credit assessment and limit management are conducted against the obliger. The bank needs to be satisfied that the obliger has the financial strength to reimburse on any call, regardless of whether the subsidiary that triggered the call can do so independently. This structure is commonly used by large conglomerates, infrastructure groups, and any corporate with frequent guarantee requirements across multiple entities in multiple locations. When a demand arrives, the bank's process is clear. Examine on its face, notify the applicant, pay if complying. The independence principle leaves little room for delay on commercial grounds. Extend or pay is a leverage mechanism, not always a genuine draw, but the bank's obligations under URD G758 are the same either way. Expiry structure matters more than most people realize at the issuance stage. Fixed is clean. Evergreen requires active management. Open-ended is a risk that should be resisted. And the on behalf of structure is a powerful tool for corporate groups looking to centralize, simplify, and reduce the cost of guarantee issuance. In the next lecture, we look at how banks assess the risk of BG and SBLC transactions and how that risk is priced.